A poor student's act of kindness reveals a hidden connection that changes everything. That's what Eliza's grandmother always told her when recounting how she met her grandfather, a chance encounter at a bus stop in the rain, an offered umbrella, and the discovery of shared histories that bound their families together long before they ever met. But Eliza had stopped believing in such serendipitous tales years ago, when life had taught her that kindness was rarely repaid and connections were tenuous at best. The December wind bit through her threadbare coat as she hurried across the university campus, her fingers numb despite the worn gloves she'd rescued from a thrift store bin last winter. Snow crunched beneath her boots, the same boots she'd carefully waterproofed 3 winters in a row because a new pair simply wasn't in her budget. The scholarship covered tuition and basic housing in the oldest dormitory on campus, but little else. "Ms. Chen, a moment please." Professor Winter's voice cut through the twilight just as Eliza was about to escape into the relative warmth of the library. She turned, suppressing a sigh. The last person she wanted to see was the notoriously demanding art history professor whose class she was barely passing. Not because she didn't understand the material. Art was her passion, the reason she endured endless hours of waitressing to supplement her meager scholarship, but because the additional research project he assigned required resources she couldn't access without spending money she didn't have. "Yes, Professor?" Eliza shifted her weight from one foot to the other, conscious of the hole in her left sock that was allowing cold to seep through. Professor Winters, with his silver-streaked hair and impeccably tailored wool coat, stood in stark contrast to the shivering students rushing past. "Your analysis of Caravaggio's use of chiaroscuro was inadequate. I expected more from someone with your potential." The word potential stung worse than the cold. Potential meant nothing when you were counting pennies for ramen noodles and working double shifts to afford art supplies. "I apologize, sir. I'll revise it this weekend." She clutched her worn canvas bag tighter, feeling the single granola bar inside, her dinner for the night, saved from the cafe where she worked mornings before class. "See that you do? The winter showcase is approaching, and I'll be selecting only 3 students to present. Your name was on my shortlist, but..." He let the implication hang in the frigid air between them. The showcase. A chance for recognition, for connection with influential gallery owners who could offer internships, paid internships that could change everything. Eliza's heart thumped painfully against her ribs. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity." She managed to keep her voice steady, professional, despite the disappointment flooding her chest with cold heavier than the winter air. As Professor Winters turned to leave, something fell from his pocket, a small leather-bound notebook, landing softly in the snow. He continued walking, unaware of his loss. Eliza hesitated. The library's warmth beckoned. Her stomach growled. The professor who had just criticized her work didn't deserve her consideration. And yet, "Professor Winters," she called, bending to retrieve the notebook. The cover was expensive, butter-soft leather with initials embossed in gold. She brushed snow from it as she hurried after him. "You dropped this." He turned, surprise flickering across his usually stern features as he patted his coat pocket. Thank you, Ms. Chen." He took the notebook, examining it carefully for damage. "This contains research notes I've been gathering for years. Quite irreplaceable." Something in his voice shifted, a crack in the facade of academic aloofness. For a moment, he looked almost human. "You're welcome." Eliza nodded, already turning away, eager to escape into the library where she could thaw her fingers enough to work on the revision he demanded. "Ms. Chen." She paused. "Perhaps you'd join me for coffee? There's a matter I'd like to discuss regarding your project." Coffee meant warmth. It might even mean an actual conversation about her work rather than dismissive criticism. But it also meant delaying her study time, and the cafe on campus would cost money she couldn't spare. "I was heading to the library to revise my paper," she said carefully. "The Fireside Cafe my treat. Their espresso is tolerable, and we might accomplish more in 15 minutes of conversation than you would in hours of solitary revision." It wasn't quite an invitation, more a professorial directive. The promise of warmth and potentially free food won out over pride. "Thank you. That would be helpful." The Fireside Cafe sat just off campus, its windows glowing amber against the darkening sky. Inside, the scent of coffee and pastries wrapped around Eliza like an embrace. She hadn't been here in months, not since realizing that a single latte cost what could feed her for an entire day. Professor Winters ordered for them both, a black coffee for himself and, after a moment's consideration, a mocha and a sandwich for Ms. Chen. The turkey avocado, I think. And perhaps a slice of banana bread. Eliza opened her mouth to protest the extravagance, but hunger silenced her. When was the last time she'd had avocado? Or meat that wasn't processed beyond recognition? They settled at a corner table. The professor placed the leather notebook between them, his fingers resting on it almost protectively. "I've been unfair to you," he said without preamble. Eliza nearly choked on her first sip of mocha. "Sir, your analysis was lacking resources, not insight. That much is evident." His gaze was direct, assessing. "You work, don't you?" "Beyond your studies. 2 jobs," she admitted. "The campus cafe mornings and waitressing at Lombardi's 3 nights a week." He nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "Yet you maintain a 3.8 GPA in one of the most demanding programs on campus. Quite remarkable." The compliment felt foreign, uncomfortable. Eliza focused on her sandwich instead, trying not to devour it too quickly despite her hunger. "I've been reviewing your portfolio," he continued. "Your original works show significant promise. Your use of light particularly, reminiscent of Edward Hopper, but with a distinctly modern sensibility." Now she did look up, surprised. She'd submitted those pieces at the beginning of the semester, and he'd never mentioned them. "Thank you. I have a proposition." He tapped the notebook. "I'm curating a special exhibition at the Harrington Gallery this spring. Illumination, light and shadow in contemporary art. I need an assistant. The position includes a stipend." Eliza's heart stuttered. The Harrington Gallery was one of the most prestigious in the city. A connection there could launch a career. A stipend could mean fewer work hours, more time for art, maybe even new boots. "Why me?" The question escaped before she could temper it with politeness. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Because you returned this." He touched the notebook again. "When many wouldn't have, and because when I opened it to check for damage, I noticed you'd slipped your bus pass inside to mark where it had fallen open." A small act of additional thoughtfulness that protected the pages from snow damage. She hadn't even realized she'd done that. It had been instinctive, using the only bookmark she had available. "Your work shows the same attention to detail, Ms. Chen. The same care. That's rare." He sipped his coffee. "The position is yours if you want it. 20 hours a week, flexible around your classes and existing work commitments. I would be honored," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the relief flooding through her. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet." A hint of his usual severity returned. "I expect excellence, and the hours will sometimes be unpredictable. The first task begins tomorrow, cataloging my personal collection for pieces to include in the exhibition. My home, 9 a.m. He wrote an address on a napkin and slid it across the table. The neighborhood was one Eliza recognized as being far beyond her means, historic brownstones where the artistic elite lived alongside old money. "I'll be there," she promised. Later that night, in her dormitory room with its perpetually rattling radiator and view of the parking lot, Eliza allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. The sandwich and mocha had filled her stomach, and the banana bread, wrapped carefully in a napkin, would be tomorrow's breakfast. The address on the napkin represented possibility. She fell asleep that night without the usual knot of anxiety about making rent, for once her dreams untroubled by the constant mathematics of survival. Morning came with fresh snow and temperatures that made her breath visible even inside her room. Eliza layered everything she owned. Thermal shirt beneath a sweater beneath her coat, double socks, scarf wound 3 times around her neck. The bus was running late due to the weather, and by the time she reached Professor Winters' address, her anxiety about being late had almost overwhelmed her excitement about the opportunity. The brownstone rose 4 stories, its windows tall and elegant. Eliza checked the napkin 3 times, certain she'd made a mistake, before finally climbing the steps and pressing the doorbell with a gloved finger. The door opened to reveal not Professor Winters, but a woman perhaps in her 70s, silver-haired and petite, with eyes the same steel gray as the professor's. "You must be Eliza," the woman said, her voice warm with a slight accent Eliza couldn't place. "I'm Miriam, Robert's mother. Come in before you freeze solid, dear." The interior of the brownstone stole Eliza's breath more effectively than the cold. Everywhere she looked, art covered the walls, not reproductions but originals, she realized with a jolt. Paintings, photographs, and sculptures from periods spanning centuries created a personal museum. Robert is in his study, finalizing the exhibition parameters. He asked me to show you to the collection room and get you started. Miriam helped Eliza with her coat, tisking at its thinness. This weather is brutal. Have you had breakfast? Before Eliza could formulate a polite decline, Miriam was leading her through to a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Sit, I insist. Robert often forgets that not everyone runs on academic intensity and coffee alone. Too stunned to protest, Eliza found herself at a kitchen island being served cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven and a cup of tea that smelled of jasmine. Miriam moved with the efficiency of someone who had hosted countless guests, her conversation light but perceptive. Robert says you're one of his most promising students, though he'd never tell you that directly, of course. He believes too much praise makes artists complacent. She rolled her eyes fondly. A philosophy I've never managed to talk him out of, despite raising him. Eliza nearly choked on her tea. He said I was promising? Miriam's laugh was warm. Among other things. That your technique shows remarkable maturity for someone your age. That your use of light reveals an emotional intelligence rare in undergraduate work. Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks. He told me my analysis was inadequate. That sounds like Robert. He reserves his genuine opinions for when you're not present to hear them. Miriam refilled Eliza's teacup without asking. He also mentioned you're working 2 jobs while maintaining an impressive GPA. That couldn't have been easy. The simple acknowledgement of her struggle, stated not with pity but with respect, made something tighten in Eliza's throat. It's necessary, she said simply. Miriam nodded as if she understood completely. Necessity is the mother of both invention and resilience. Now finish your breakfast while I show you what you'll be cataloging. She led Eliza to a room on the 2nd floor, a space that must once have been a formal dining room, but now served as a private gallery. Climate-controlled cases lined the walls, while freestanding pieces occupied the center space. Each piece was illuminated perfectly, the lighting systems clearly professional grade. Robert has been collecting since he was 16, Miriam explained. His father, my late husband, was an art dealer. The collection has pieces from both of them, along with some family heirlooms. Eliza moved slowly around the room, recognition and awe building with each piece she identified. A small Degas sketch, what appeared to be an authentic Morisot. Contemporary pieces by artists whose waiting lists were years long. This is incredible, she breathed. It's a legacy, Miriam said quietly. Art has been the family business for generations. My husband's gallery, then Robert's academic career and curatorial work. She paused beside a small painting hung slightly apart from the others. This one has always been my favorite, though. Eliza moved closer. It was a modestly sized oil painting of a young woman in traditional Chinese dress standing beside a window. The light fell across her face in a way that captured both strength and vulnerability. Though the style was more impressionistic than photorealistic, the emotion in the subject's eyes was unmistakable. It's beautiful, Eliza said truthfully. The artist captured such dignity in her expression. Yes. Miriam's voice held a note of something Eliza couldn't quite identify. My husband acquired it shortly after we were married. The artist was relatively unknown, a young man who had emigrated from Shanghai in the 1940s. Li Wei Chen. Eliza's head snapped up. Chen? Yes. Miriam was watching her closely now. A not uncommon name, I believe. My grandfather's name was Li Wei Chen, Eliza said slowly. He was an artist who came to America from Shanghai after World War II. The silence that followed seemed to expand, filling the room with unasked questions. Miriam's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex. Did you know him? Eliza finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not personally, no. Miriam touched the frame of the painting gently. My husband handled the acquisition. But I've always loved this piece. There's something in the brushwork that speaks of great care. Before Eliza could ask more questions, Professor Winters appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from professional to startled when he saw them standing before the painting. I see you've met my mother, he said, recovering quickly. And she's shown you the collection room. Robert, Miriam said, her voice carrying an undertone Eliza couldn't interpret. Did you know that Eliza's grandfather was Li Wei Chen? The professor's gaze moved from his mother to Eliza, then to the painting. No, he said carefully. I did not make that connection. Something in the air between mother and son made Eliza feel she was missing crucial context. The professor moved further into the room, his usual academic detachment firmly back in place. "We should begin the cataloging," he said briskly. "Mother, perhaps you could bring us coffee in an hour." It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Miriam paused as if considering saying something more, then simply nodded and left the room, touching Eliza's shoulder gently as she passed. The next few hours passed in focused work. Professor Winters provided Eliza with a digital tablet and specialized art cataloging software, showing her how to record detailed information about each piece: provenance, condition, exhibition history, and current valuation. He was thorough in his instructions but oddly distant, avoiding the painting by Li Wei Chen entirely. By mid-afternoon, Eliza's back ached from careful examination of delicate pieces, but her mind buzzed with everything she was learning. This was practical education beyond anything her courses had offered, hands-on experience with museum-quality art and the systems used to track and manage collections. "That's enough for today," Professor Winters finally said, checking his watch. "You've made excellent progress. Thank you for this opportunity," Eliza said, carefully setting the tablet on a side table. "Your collection is extraordinary." He nodded, a fleeting smile crossing his face. "It represents a lifetime of passion. 2 lifetimes counting my father's contribution." Eliza hesitated, then gestured toward her grandfather's painting. "May I ask how that piece came into your family's collection?" "It's just, I never knew my grandfather's work had reached private collections of this caliber." The professor's expression closed slightly. "My father acquired it sometime in the 1950s, I believe, before I was born. The provenance documentation should be in the files, but we haven't reached that section yet." His tone suggested the conversation was over, but Eliza couldn't let it go so easily. "My mother has a few of his sketches, but he stopped painting after coming to America. He worked in a restaurant to support the family." Something flickered in Professor Winters' eyes, discomfort perhaps, or sympathy. The immigrant artist's tale is unfortunately common. Talent sacrificed for survival. Yes. Eliza swallowed against the familiar ache that came with thinking about opportunities her grandfather never had. "Well, thank you again. Should I return tomorrow at the same time?" "Yes. We have much to accomplish before the exhibition." He escorted her downstairs, where Miriam waited with Eliza's coat, now mysteriously much warmer than when she'd arrived. "I took the liberty of slipping a hot water bottle into the lining," Miriam explained, helping her into it. "An old-world trick for bitter weather. And there's some food for your dinner." She pressed a cloth-wrapped package into Eliza's hands. "No arguments, I always cook too much." The kindness, so unexpected and genuine, brought a lump to Eliza's throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." "Miriam, please." The older woman's eyes crinkled warmly. "And do bring a proper coat tomorrow. I have several that no longer fit me but would suit your height perfectly." Before Eliza could protest, Professor Winters cleared his throat. "Mother, Ms. Chen is my assistant, not a charity case." "Nonsense, Robert. She's a guest in our home who's helping with your exhibition. Hospitality is basic human decency." Miriam's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, those coats are gathering dust." The ride home on the bus, warmed by the hot water bottle and Miriam's kindness, gave Eliza time to process the day's revelations. Her grandfather's painting, a piece she'd never known existed, hanging in the private collection of her art history professor. The way both Winters had reacted to the connection. The opportunity that had fallen into her lap after a simple act of returning a dropped notebook. In her dormitory room, she unwrapped Miriam's package to find a container of homemade soup, fresh bread, and what appeared to be baklava. Enough food for dinner and tomorrow's lunch, prepared with care rather than necessity. She ate slowly, savoring each bite while researching Li Wei Chen online. There was little to find: a few mentions in articles about Chinese immigrant artists, a record of a small gallery showing in 1947, then nothing. As if he had disappeared from the art world entirely, which aligned with her mother's stories of a grandfather who had abandoned art for survival. "He had such talent," her mother would say, showing Eliza the few charcoal sketches they'd kept. "But talent doesn't feed a family in a new country where no one knows your name." The next morning, Eliza arrived at the Winters brownstone to find Miriam waiting with a rack of coats. "Don't look so alarmed," the older woman said, laughing at Eliza's expression. "Just try them on. If none suit you, no harm done." The first coat, a deep burgundy wool with a black velvet collar, fit as if it had been tailored for her. Eliza stared at her reflection in the hallway mirror, startled by the transformation. With the proper coat, she looked like she belonged in this world of art and brownstones, not like someone perpetually one paycheck from disaster. "It's perfect," Miriam declared. "The color suits your complexion beautifully." "I can't accept this," Eliza protested weakly, even as her fingers caressed the wool. "It's too much." "Nonsense. It's been in a garment bag for years." Miriam adjusted the collar, her touch maternal. "Consider it part of your compensation for helping Robert. That man works his assistants to the bone. You'll earn this coat and more." As if summoned by mention of his name, Professor Winters appeared, carrying a folder. "Mother, are you finished outfitting Ms. Chen? We have considerable work to accomplish today." Miriam rolled her eyes at Eliza conspiratorially. "Always in a rush, this one. Go on then, but remember to break for lunch. I'll bring something up at 1. The day passed in focused cataloging, with Eliza learning more about art handling and documentation than a semester of classes could have taught her. Professor Winters was demanding but also unexpectedly patient, explaining techniques and sharing knowledge accumulated over decades in the field. By late afternoon, they had reached the section containing her grandfather's painting. Eliza approached it with professional detachment, recording dimensions and condition notes while her heart raced with personal connection. "The file for this piece seems to be missing," she finally said, checking the digital database. "There's no provenance record." Professor Winters looked up from his desk, where he'd been writing exhibition notes. "Check the physical files in the cabinet. 3rd drawer under C for Chen." The manila folder was thin, containing just a few yellowed papers. Eliza opened it carefully, her breath catching as she saw her grandfather's signature on a bill of sale dated June 17, 1952. The amount paid, $75, made her wince, knowing what the painting would be worth today. "He sold it directly to your father?" she asked, scanning the document. The professor was silent for a long moment. "Not exactly. My father's gallery purchased it, yes, but there were circumstances." Something in his tone made Eliza look up. "What circumstances?" He sighed, removing his glasses to pinch the bridge of his nose. "It's a complicated story, Missy. Chen. One perhaps better told by my mother, who witnessed it firsthand." "Please," Eliza said quietly. "He's my grandfather. I know almost nothing about his life as an artist." Professor Winters studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. But let's move this conversation downstairs. Mother will want to participate, and frankly, she remembers more than I do. I was only a child when the painting came into our possession." Downstairs, in a sitting room filled with more art and well-worn books, Miriam listened to their conversation with a thoughtful expression. "I wondered if this might come up," she said finally, pouring tea for the 3 of them. "Robert, fetch the box from my study, would you?" When he left, Miriam turned to Eliza. "Your grandfather's painting has always been special to me, for reasons beyond its artistic merit. When I heard your last name yesterday, I wondered, but it seemed too coincidental. Did you know him?" Eliza asked, the question that had been burning since yesterday. "Yes," Miriam said simply, "though not as well as I would have liked. We met only a few times." Professor Winters returned carrying an ornate wooden box, which he handed to his mother with obvious reverence. Miriam opened it carefully to reveal letters, old photographs, and what appeared to be gallery receipts, all meticulously preserved. "Your grandfather came to my husband's gallery in the spring of 1952. She began, selecting a black and white photograph. "This was taken at the opening of a small exhibition Charles, my husband, arranged for emerging artists." Eliza took the photograph with trembling fingers. There stood her grandfather, decades younger than the old man she barely remembered from childhood, looking dignified in a borrowed suit. Beside him was a striking painting, the very one that now hung upstairs. "He was talented," Miriam continued. "Charles recognized that immediately. But the art world then was even more closed to immigrant artists than it is now, especially those from Asia. Your grandfather couldn't get exhibitions or commissions despite his obvious skill. My mother said he gave up art," Eliza said softly, "that he couldn't make a living from it." Miriam nodded sadly. "That spring he came to the gallery with that painting and several others. He needed money. His wife was expecting their first child. My mother," Eliza whispered. "Yes. Charles bought everything Li Wei brought that day, paid more than the asking price, though it was still far less than the work deserved." Miriam selected another item from the box, a handwritten letter. They corresponded for a while afterward. "Charles tried to represent him, to find him more opportunities, but my grandfather had already taken a job at a restaurant," Eliza finished. To support his family, yes. The American dream deferred for the next generation? Miriam's smile was sad. Charles kept track of him over the years, bought more pieces when he could. They're all documented in this box. Eliza stared at the collection of papers, a record of her grandfather's artistic legacy she'd never known existed. Why did you keep all this? Miriam and her son exchanged a glance laden with meaning. Because, Miriam said carefully, your grandfather's story mattered to us. Because artists deserve to be remembered, even when circumstances force them to set aside their gifts. There was more. Eliza could sense it in the weighted silence, in the way Professor Winters studied her face as if looking for something familiar. There's another reason, he finally said. Mother, I think it's time. Miriam nodded, reaching deeper into the box to withdraw a final photograph, this one in color, though faded with age. She handed it to Eliza without comment. The photograph showed a young Miriam, radiant in a white dress, standing between two men. One clearly Charles Winters, based on the resemblance to his son, and the other, my grandfather, Eliza breathed. At your wedding? Yes. Miriam's voice was soft with memory. Li Wei and Charles were friends by then. Not close, perhaps, but connected by respect and shared passion for art. When Charles and I announced our engagement, your grandfather insisted on gifting us one of his paintings, a wedding portrait he'd done of me. She gestured to a painting on the far wall that Eliza hadn't noticed before. It's beautiful, Eliza said, moving closer to examine the brushwork. The style was unmistakably her grandfather's, but with a warmth she hadn't seen in the few examples of his work she knew. It was the last painting he ever completed, as far as we know, Professor Winters said. He told my father he was putting away his brushes to take a full-time position at the Golden Dragon restaurant. The name sent a shock through Eliza's system. That was my grandparents' restaurant. My mother grew up working there. It put her through college. Yes, Miriam smiled. A worthy use of his talents in its own way, creating security for his family's future. But there's something else you should know, Professor Winters said, his academic detachment finally falling away completely. Something I only learned myself when I was in college. Miriam reached for her son's hand, squeezing it gently before turning back to Eliza. Charles helped your grandfather secure a business loan for that restaurant. Co-signed for it when no bank would approve an immigrant without collateral. It was the least he could do, he felt, for an artist whose work would someday be recognized for its brilliance. Eliza sat very still, absorbing this information. Her family's restaurant, the business that had sustained them for 2 generations, that had funded her mother's education and indirectly her own, had come into existence partly through the help of Professor Winters' father. Why? The question was barely audible. Why would he do that for someone he barely knew? Because artists should support each other, Professor Winters said. That was my father's philosophy. Art transcends boundaries of culture and circumstance. Miriam's expression suggested there was more to the story, but she simply nodded in agreement with her son. So when I returned your notebook? Eliza began. I recognized your name, yes. Professor Winters looked almost embarrassed. I should have made the connection sooner, but Chen is not uncommon, and I didn't know Li Wei had a granddaughter studying art history. Not until Mother pointed out the resemblance between you and the woman in the painting upstairs. The woman in the painting is my grandmother, Eliza realized suddenly. That's why it was his favorite subject. He painted her before they were married. Yes. Miriam's smile was gentle. Love captured in brushstrokes. Art preserving what time tries to erase. They talked for hours, Miriam sharing stories Charles had told her about Li Wei, Professor Winters explaining how his father's collection had sparked his own career in art history, and Eliza filling in what little she knew of her grandfather's later years. The conversation flowed easily, as if they were not strangers but family friends reconnecting after a long separation. When evening fell, Professor Winters insisted on driving Eliza back to campus rather than letting her take the bus. Before they left, Miriam pressed the wooden box into her hands. These belong to you now, the older woman said firmly. Your family's history. Charles would have wanted Li Wei's granddaughter to have them. I can't, Eliza began. You can and you will. Miriam's tone was gentle but brooking no argument. Consider it payment for helping Robert with his exhibition. Speaking of which, she turned to her son. Robert, I assume Li Wei's works will feature prominently? Of course. He looked almost offended at the suggestion otherwise. I've been planning a special section highlighting overlooked immigrant artists. With Ms. Chen's permission, I'd like to feature her grandfather's work as the centerpiece. The drive back to campus was quiet, both Eliza and Professor Winters absorbed in their own thoughts. When he pulled up outside her dormitory, he turned to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Ms. Chen, Eliza, I owe you an apology." She looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "For my harshness earlier this semester. For not recognizing your name and making the connection sooner." He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. "My father would be disappointed in me. He believed that art created bonds that transcended time and circumstance. That when we support artists, we're investing in humanity's collective soul." "It sounds like he was a remarkable man," Eliza said softly. "He was..." The professor's voice held genuine emotion. "And your grandfather's work was special to him. The connection between our families, it's one I should have honored better." "You're honoring it now," Eliza said, touched by his sincerity. "Through the exhibition, through sharing these memories?" He nodded, seeming to regain his professional composure. "The assistant position is still yours, of course, but I'd like to offer something additional. The department has a private scholarship fund for exceptional students facing financial hardship. I'd like to nominate you. It would cover living expenses, art supplies, everything the regular scholarship doesn't." Eliza's breath caught. That's incredibly generous. It's not generosity. It's recognition of talent and dedication." His smile was small but genuine. "Your grandfather would be proud of you, I think." Carrying forward the artistic legacy he had to set aside. That night, in her dormitory room, Eliza carefully examined every item in the wooden box. Letters between her grandfather and Charles Winters revealed a friendship deeper than Miriam had described, discussions of art theory, philosophy, and the challenges of creating beauty in a world often hostile to it. Sketches her grandfather had given to Charles showed a talent even more profound than she'd realized. Most precious was a letter dated 1975, the year before her grandfather died. In it, he thanked Charles for everything he'd done, expressing hope that future generations might reconnect their families through art once more. Perhaps our grandchildren will meet someday in galleries or universities, sharing the passion for beauty that brought us together despite our different paths. Art creates connections that transcend time and circumstance. Tears slipped down Eliza's cheeks as she read his words, prescient in ways he couldn't have imagined. A poor student's act of kindness, returning a dropped notebook, had indeed revealed a hidden connection that changed everything. The next morning, she returned to the Winters brownstone wearing the burgundy coat Miriam had given her. This time, she brought something of her own, a small canvas she'd painted the previous semester, showing a young restaurant worker staring out a window at the moon, paintbrushes visible but untouched on a nearby table. "I'd like to donate this to the exhibition," she told Professor Winters, "as a companion piece to my grandfather's work, to show how art endures across generations, even when circumstances force it to wait." His eyes widened as he examined the painting, recognition dawning. "The composition mirrors your grandfather's piece upstairs." "Deliberate? Unconscious, actually," Eliza admitted. "I painted this before I knew his work existed, before I knew our families were connected. Art in the blood," he murmured, using white-gloved hands to hold the canvas carefully. "It finds its way out one way or another." In the months that followed, Eliza's life transformed. The scholarship freed her from one job, giving her more time for both studies and art. Working alongside Professor Winters, Robert, as he eventually asked her to call him, expanded her knowledge and professional network beyond anything she could have imagined. The exhibition opened in early spring. Illumination, Light and Shadow in Contemporary Art, featured works from renowned artists alongside emerging talents, with a special section dedicated to Li Wei Chen and other immigrant artists whose contributions had been overlooked by history. On opening night, Eliza stood before her grandfather's painting, now displayed alongside her own work, and a carefully curated selection of his sketches from the wooden box. The exhibition text detailed not just his technique but his story, the sacrifices made, the legacy preserved, the connections forged through art across generations. "He would be so proud," her mother whispered, standing beside her. When Eliza had called to share the discovery of her grandfather's paintings and the connection to the Winters family, her mother had been stunned into rare silence before booking a flight to attend the opening. "I wish I'd known him better," Eliza said, studying the brushstrokes that connected her to a man she'd barely remembered. "Known this part of him. You know him through your own art?" her mother said, squeezing her hand. "Through the way you see light and shadow, That's how legacy works, not always in straight lines, but in spirals that come back to essential truths. Across the gallery, Miriam Winters caught Eliza's eye and smiled, raising her champagne glass in a silent toast. Beside her, Robert was deep in conversation with a museum curator, gesturing occasionally toward the Chen family display. A simple act of kindness, returning a dropped notebook, had revealed connections lying dormant for decades. Connections that had changed Eliza's life in ways she was still discovering, not just through financial support or professional opportunity, but through the reclamation of a legacy she hadn't known was hers to claim. That night, after the guests had gone and only the exhibition team remained, Eliza stood alone before her grandfather's painting one last time. In the young woman's eyes, her grandmother's eyes, she saw determination tempered with hope. The same expression she now recognized in her own mirror reflection. "Thank you," she whispered to the painting, to her grandfather, to whatever strands of fate had woven this moment into existence, for the reminder that kindness creates connections that transcend time and circumstance, that even the smallest actions can reveal hidden paths leading to transformed lives, that art, like love, finds ways to endure. Outside, spring rain tapped gently against the gallery windows, not unlike the winter snow that had fallen the day she'd returned Professor Winter's notebook. Different weather, different season, but the same essential truth, that when we reach toward others with open hands, we sometimes find we're reaching across generations, closing circles we didn't know needed closing. A poor student's act of kindness had revealed a hidden connection that truly changed everything, not just her circumstances, but her understanding of her place in a continuing story. A story told in brushstrokes and kindnesses, in sacrifices and discoveries, in connections that wait patiently to be uncovered by those willing to pause, even in their own hardship, to help another person along the way.